Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Financial Coaches Podcast. I'm your co-host, Maria Casillas, joined here not only by my incredible co-host, Cody Sizemore, but also by a really fantastic guest that we are so honored to have today. We have Mary Ann Stenquist with us today, and she is a spending coach who actually is a woman after my own heart, doesn't really love budgets. She's very much around the psychology of money and spending and why we do what we do and really getting to the root of that. So we're going to have a fantastic conversation with her today. But before I fully bring you in, Mary Ann, I want to just remind all of our listeners how much we appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in today. Mary Ann is actually a listener of the podcast, so that's why we're super honored that we have her here today. And we just want to remind everybody to find us in the groups. It's at New Money Habits. No, I always mess that one up. It is the Financial Coaches Group by New Money Habits in Facebook. We encourage you to come find us there because we can just get all sorts of camaraderie going on, questions, conversations, and really start to build some community. So we invite you there. And without further ado, I want to just go ahead and have you introduce yourself, Mary Ann. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. So yes, my name is Mary Ann, and as was said, I'm a spending coach. I help people become unshoppable. I don't like budgeting. I don't like dieting. Those are two things I hate. And I had to kind of look at the spending, look at the fun things to really realize where's my money going and where do I want it to go. And that was ultimately what made the change. And I found that more and more people want what is motivating for them. They don't want sacrifice. And in this tough economy, it's hard. Just the daily essentials are hard. And so asking people to sacrifice more than they already are is difficult. And so finding that motivation, finding what is really, really important to them and like lights them up is really, really amazing because they do all the work after that. You just inspire and light that fire and they're off to the races.
Yeah. This topic of spending habits is one that I feel that every single coach who's listening is very familiar with. So It's quite the topic to talk about. And I'm really, really excited to get into it. But how did you get into this? Because there's a lot of people who would be like, yeah, I'm a financial coach, or they'll say, yeah, I help with budgeting. But you don't really say either one. You're like, no, I'm a spending coach, So fill us in as to your journey to get you to here.
Sure. I've always been fascinated with money. I've always loved learning why people buy. I've been fascinated with the rich and famous, what they buy and looking into the lives of the rich and then in my own journey with overspending, I've struggled for years with overspending, and I didn't consider myself a financial guru. I didn't consider myself an expert or of anything. I just was trying to fix my spending as a stay-at-home mom and as someone that had dreams and passions that I wanted to pursue, but there wasn't money left over to pursue those things. And so it got to the point where I was like, no, I'm done with this. I want to afford the life I want with the money I already have. And when I was doing research, it really came down to the advice was just make a budget and just stop spending. And that didn't help. It didn't help me. And so instead of looking at where my money should go in terms of a budget, I started looking at where my money was actually going. And that's when I noticed all of the money I was spending on bargain, all of the money I was spending to fill an emotional need. And I wondered, seeing these trends and patterns, were these unique to me or were they unique to all people? And I've always been fascinated with psychology, why we do things. And that's when I looked into the psychology of money, and I kind of was looking into that and like how to stop spending before it happens. I literally typed that into Google and nothing came up. And so I was like, I wonder, I mean, budgeting tips came up, but that was it. And quizzes came up, but it was like, you're a spender. And I was like, yeah, no doubt. I knew that. And so anyway, it just started this journey of kind of self-discovery, and it lit my own fire to figure out like, wow, there are human needs that we all have that are not being met, and we're trying to compensate, and we tend to overcompensate by overbuying. And if it's not overspending, it's over drinking, it's overeating, it's whatever our favorite flavor is. And so I just, I really feel like this is a niche that needs to be talked about more, and it's not. And so I'm just honored to be talking, especially to financial coaches, because you're in the trenches with people that are trying to budget. And I love it because I talk to a lot of financial coaches that are like, yeah, my spenders. They're just, and they're like their own special group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, technically all of us are spenders. I mean, we just are. And spending is just the easiest thing to hide. And so it's just, we can all do better. And as financial coaches, I think we need to understand why people buy, to have a little bit more like compassion, and to help put more I'd say motivation, and like put more heart in it for you and for them, because guilt doesn't work for people. And I'm not saying financial coaches guilt people, but people already have a sense of guilt about their finances. And the fact that they're coming to a financial coach is like very vulnerable. It's very, it can be embarrassing. It's a lot of things. And so they're feeling exposed, and then to like be nitpicking everything, the natural reaction is probably overspending, because they're like, oh my gosh, everything's out in the open. I I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I just feel so exposed. And so it just helps to have that understanding that all of us are spenders, and if it's not spending again, it's something else. And we can just have that common humanity.
Yeah. There's a few things that you said that I really liked, and I actually have a question for you too, because I think that this is a really important question. But I like that you actually use the word like you had enough kind of thing. So I think that's really important, because we have to have like that I've had enough moment in order to actually like make a real change. So, sometimes when we talk to people, there's like different layers. So Maria actually talks about this. She talks about like the different stages of change, of where people are at. And sometimes people are in like, this place to where they're thinking about changing, but it doesn't hurt as bad. So, maybe we'll talk to those people, and then, we see the trends, we see that they need support, we see that, their potential, but they, for whatever reason, don't think that they may need to take that next step. And then we get frustrated, right? So that's important to know that, like, it has to be the right kind of person in the right stage of their journey. And the other thing that was basically like the overlying theme of what you had said was, you were talking about like the budgeting versus the money psychology side of things. Maria and I are like totally on the same page. And one thing that I tell people literally all the time, and especially like I tell this to, potential clients during like our consultations, I tell them, I'm like, listen, when it comes to personal finance, one thing that I have learned, and this is something I learned with my own journey, but also with like helping other people as well, is that like 20% of it has to do with the numbers, and the other 80% has to do with the person behind the money. So
Absolutely.
that's what you're basically saying is like, even with spending, like it doesn't necessarily have to do with the transaction, but more so the person behind, the swiping of the card or whatever it may be. So
Absolutely.
I want to dig into that a little bit more. But my question, you said that you felt like you tried budgeting, and it just didn't work, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So there are so many people that are just like you. And even with like weight loss, they're like, oh, well, just move more and eat less. That should work, right? And then they try it and it doesn't work, kind of thing. So it's the same line of thinking. But I'm curious as to why you feel that a budget doesn't really help.
So budgets tend to be kind of after the fact and before the fact and not in the trenches with you. You're not looking at your budget. Everything works out in a budget. Everything looks perfect. It all works out. And then on paper, it works perfect on paper. But we don't spend on paper. We spend in real time, real life, with real emotions, no time, and also budgets tend to be very not unrealistic, but it's like the potential. You're very optimistic about like, oh, I'm gonna save half of my income. I'm gonna save 2/3 of it. You're thinking you're also looking at the past month and thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to do so much better. And it's like next month got to make up for it. And these are changes and behaviors that you've been implementing your whole life, and they're not going to change month to month. They have to be changes that you're working on consistently, and that gets lost in the budget. Also, I think there's not a clear understanding, at least for me, and maybe you can kind of share your experiences with your clients, that in order to save this amount, I have to spend this amount. There's not that correlation. It's not obvious to people that, well, I'm just spending this. Well, you're spending $20. That means you have to save $20 somewhere else, and vice versa. So it's that mental math that we do in our head, but the budget is during the month, you're pulling from places, and what needs to happen is it needs to come from somewhere. And I think that needs to be more of like it's like you make the budget, but it's like, now how do I actually do it? It's kind of like goal setting.
Yeah. So this, like, I'm a very visual person. I like to talk in metaphors. I'm weird. It is what it is. But what's going through my head right now is like bowling. So let me explain myself. All right. So the way I'm hearing you is like, hey, if you were to be like a total newbie at bowling and you were to try and throw that bowling ball down the lane, you're probably going to get a gutter ball kind of thing because you've never bowled before. But then you get those things on the side that the bumpers, right? And, let's say the bumpers are like the budget per se. Yeah. So you see any kid go down there and they got the bumpers on there and the ball's going doom, 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 doom. And eventually it does go down the lane and it does hit some pins, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to get a strike. It just means they're going to get something, Yeah. And that's the way I'm kind of hearing this is like, just because you have a budget doesn't mean that you're going to hit a strike because you got to work on your form first. Yeah. Kind of thing.
I love that. I'm a metaphor person too. And I even think I went bowling recently with my daughter, and I have had some physical pain in my back and stuff, so I wasn't able to just bowl normally. So I used the metal rail for kids that guides the bowling ball down.
Yep.
And I almost think to add to that, it's like that rail is like the budget, and that it gets us where you need to go. And then the spending plan is kind of like the bumpers, where it's like you've got to put roadblocks, because if you just let it fly with no gutter, with no restrictions, nothing, it's gonna go in the gutter. You're not gonna hit a strike. And so I think that's a great analogy. Who knew? Who knew bowling could do so much about money? I'm not gonna lie, when you said bowling, I was like, do tell. I don't know.
This is just how my brain works, so it's fine.
I love it. I love it.
So if I may, I've been quiet for a while. That's all going to end right now. Okay, so I'm curious to know. No, it's all good. But I always feel like when I am quiet for a while, and then I like to go back, and I feel like I'm backtracking. But I hope that you can give me some good stuff here. The idea of the label spending and saver, right? Spender saver. That I've been having conversations with other people outside of this podcast. And we've talked about the impact that had on my personal life and the life of my clients. And that basically just this idea of if you are in a married relationship, there was this, we went through the Dave Ramsey program, full disclosure here. So I was taught through that program that there is a spender and a saver. And that's just I just accepted that blindly in the moment. And it was to the detriment of my husband. And I just wanted to share this because it's a personal story that maybe you can relate to. And so can some of the other coaches. But I was a stay-at-home mom as well. And I was the one who was doing the finances. I'm curious to know, Mary Ann, do you do the finances in your relationship?
Okay. Split. It's like 60-40, 65-30. Yeah.
Okay. Well, ours is split in the sense that my husband brings home all of it and I'm the one who manages it. So, having said that, I'm also more of the nerd. I really like numbers. That it just was something I like puzzles. It kind of came to me. It landed on my lap more naturally. He was not so much into that thing, and he likes to buy things. He likes to buy high quality things. Like one of his habits growing up they grew up very poor. And like they would use, shoes from whether it was somewhere like Goodwill or Payless. Do you remember Payless? I don't know if any of you are old enough to know Payless. Okay. So they're still around.
Well, they used to be. I don't think so because I loved paying less. I'm sick of paying.
Well, I'll tell you what, when I met my husband, he's like, you shop where? At Payless? Like, you're going to do that? And it all became because they grew up with almost nothing. And then he ended up working in a shoe store where they had high quality shoes. And he was able to see how those would actually last much longer. And so in his mind, it was like, you're going to spend this extra money 4 times. It's not very much money, but you're going to spend it 4 times. And that ends up being more money in the long run. So the logic actually made sense to me where I see him doing that, though, is like with children's shoes. And I'm like, bro, you're not going to need to buy 4 times the amount of shoes because their feet are going to grow in less than, a quarter.
They're going to outgrow them before they outrun them.
That's correct. Yeah. That is absolutely correct. So we have, differences in that area, but he really likes like high quality shoes for himself and for me and that kind of thing. And it goes like that with just about anything in life. So I have had to learn that logic. Like sometimes you don't like the cheapest thing isn't always the best deal. Right. But because he had that growing up and I had that nerd mentality, I just took on the role of being the saver and he took on the role of being the spender. But I can tell you in full transparency that I absolutely am like the deal finder. I'm the emotional spender, all of those things that you mentioned. And it was probably about 2 years ago when I'm like, because I have control over the whole budget thing, it was a lot easier to hide that and to it wasn't anything that it was like big amounts or anything, but it was still easier either to hide and or justify. And then I would share it with him afterwards, because he was more of the spender, he would always like let me off the hook. He'd give me permission, et cetera, et cetera. But it basically enabled me. If we're talking about terms like that, that's what it was pure enabling. And it took me till a couple of years ago where I'm just like, no, like that was totally unfair. We're both spenders. And so when you said we're all spenders, I want to hone in on that for just a second, because I'm like, you know what? There is so much truth to that. And I thought, well, maybe it's just a me thing. But now that you're saying it out loud, I know you're seeing that in other ways too. We are all spenders. Some of us might spend differently than others, but we can't be livers if we're not at least spenders in some way. And even the people who absolutely claim to be savers, you're still spending money on something. It might be you're spending on your future, you're spending on, college, you're spending on a new car, whatever you're quote unquote saving for, you are spending in a way. So I actually, I didn't completely do away with budgets for clients a long time ago, but a long time ago, I did a lot of what you're talking about because it just made more sense to me. And anytime anyone wanted to do a budget, I actually called it the spending plan for all the reasons that you just said. So I am curious. You mentioned budget and spending plan. Do you do two different things, or do you just rename it? That's one question I had.
So I do more of like the spending plan is still the spending money that you're spending part of the budget. Does that make sense? So I'm not
It's like their
renaming the
fun
budget.
money type
It's
thing.
like it's more the variable expenses
Okay.
that like the food that is the restaurants, the fast food money that's being spent that they don't want to be spent there, that type thing. So not your fixed expenses if that makes sense.
Okay.
So it's more I attract people that are like, I make money, but I have nothing to show for it. Where is it going? And so
Okay. Very, very good. And then a second question where I'm just kind of curious, when you say we're all spenders, do you mean anything different than what I just kind of presented?
no, I was just going to add that I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I identified from my own spending 6 different spending types. And there's the necessity spender, there's the bargain spender, the emotional spender, the impulsive spender, passive spender, and saving spender. And in the new podcast, actually, I'm going to do a podcast episode on those 6 types. But
Wonderful.
it really says what you just, it goes into detail about what you just said. Because even the necessity spender spends money, but their spending is on things for the household, for necessities. They're very aware of what is a need and what is a want. And the funny thing about the saver and a spender, we glorify the saver and then we like villainize the spender. But with the spending type, there's pros and cons with all of them. With the bargain spender, they find bargains in a black hole. I mean, they are so good at finding bargains. That's not a bad thing. It's just in excess sometimes. And then the necessity spender, sometimes it's a bad thing because not spending is not the same as saving intentionally. And so there's balance within each one, but that's why I think it's a much more healthy view to view it as like your personality type, because it's also not a character defect. It's just it goes back to your needs. It goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and all of us have those needs, but each one of us has a need that's more important than the other. And that's why we have people that buy the yachts, the luxury goods, or we have the people that buy the experiences. We buy, clothes and luxury items, things like that. And that's what I find so fascinating. And so once we understand like why we buy, then we can start figuring out how to spend less in those areas we really don't care about, so that we don't have to cut back in the areas that we don't want to cut back in.
So with someone who may have a spending issue, we'll just say, how do you help them through that? Like what's the whole process? Because I think I have a good idea, but I'm actually really curious, like, as like your own unique approach.
Sure.
Because I think that, you brought up like, money psychology side of things, right? So,
Yep.
And that's something that I think is really important, especially for our listeners, to know that like, hey, you can't just throw a budget at someone and expect them to change. So how would you kind of like address that question if someone listening to this is thinking like, well, how do I help someone actually change a spending habit to take it from unhealthy, no matter what type of spender they are, to then healthy?
Sure. And to kind of readdress what we talked about earlier, we don't change until we have to most of the time. If we find a motivation for our clients, that almost accelerates the process a little bit more, because you don't have to wait until they're at rock bottom, until they have no resources. And then it makes your job easier because you don't have to work with nothing. And so I challenge people you kind of have to look at it from their standpoint. It's like, what's in it for me? And so it's like, I was thinking the other day, like finding the money, challenge them to find the money that they're spending. And so that can be really overwhelming for people. So I always encourage my clients to first take the free quiz. It's free for everyone, just to identify what their primary drive is to spend. All of us are all the different types at different times, but the primary drive tells a lot about their spending. And then once they have identified it, for example, the bargain spender, they've identified that type, then they can say, okay, I spend most of my money on bargains when I go out to thrift stores, when I go out to Dollar Tree, when I go out to all of these places. Or it could be a location, or it could be I spend a bunch of money when I go so different locations, and then it's like, or I have like specific categories of items that I tend to buy. A lot of the times with the bargain buyer, it's like it's opportunistic. But you just get a category. You just got to start getting your wheels turning, because spending and overspending is very overwhelming. So I want them to just like identify one area, and then they can start thinking, oh yeah, I really do spend a lot of money in this. And then they just start tracking just that spending type. They just start tracking their bargains. And then what I then encourage them to do is to start tracking their spending habits. And this is a key difference between the budgeting approach and the spending approach. The budgeting approach traditionally is tracking your spending. That's where you're really only concerned about the amount they spend and how much they have left over. That doesn't tell you anything in terms of their spending habits. And you lose so much information with that. And so when I say tracking spending habits, we're tracking those impulsive purchases. We're not writing every single thing out that we buy. We're writing I went to Target first. What took you to Target? I went to Target because I was bored and I saw something in the $5 bin area and it was so cute. I couldn't resist it. It was a bargain. I had to buy it. And so you write what you bought that was impulsive or unplanned, I should say. And then you write why you bought it. That captures so much more of what happens in the spending trip that you lose in just tracking, I spent $200. Even at the grocery store. In my coaching with clients, I've shown them 2 receipts that numerically they spend around $150 on both of them. And one's actually like $120. But the $150 one, it's like all healthy items. And the $120 ones there's a bunch of chocolate, there's a bunch of frozen foods, there's a bunch of like house items. And so you look at those numbers and you say, oh, I stuck to my budget. And it's like, well, but your spending habits were not controlled in the second one. They were with the first one. So I just think it's so fascinating that we just ignore that part of it when it's like, that's what we need to be looking into. And so that's what I encourage people to start doing is just tracking their spending habits, why they're buying things, those little things that sneak up on the receipts. And that really captures kind of your mentality, like, you only live once type thing. And I deserve this. I deserve to reward myself. So that's where I start people, because that way, when they see it, it's just money here and there. But then when they see the total, and even if they start with like the bargains, seeing all the money they've spent on bargains in a certain amount of time, it's like, oh, wow, that's a lot of money. And I really wish that I could spend it elsewhere. What brings you that desire more than those bargains, more than what you're buying? And then just to add to that, even like what you're buying says a lot about your life. People buy books and it's like you value personal development, you value knowledge, and you value sharing. And then they buy vacations, you value like getting away and experiences. And how can we create those experiences in our life without the price tag, without the huge credit card costs that we're putting toward those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of that I feel is like, you're like uncovering things. It's like discovering like, hey, what type of buyer are you? Why is it happening? But I'm curious about, how do you help people overcome that?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like actually
Yeah,
like make that change kind of thing.
absolutely.
What are some things that you do?
Yeah, so uncovering, so kind of going with what I was just saying with um what you're buying. A lot of the times we compensate for things that we say, "Oh, I can't afford that. That's too expensive. I can't do that." And yet we spend so much money in other areas on things we really don't care about. And for example, in my personal life, I would have killed for childcare, house cleaning services, meal delivery services with two young kids, chronic illness, no family support available. I was drowning. And that's when I hit that rock bottom of I need help but we just can't afford it. And I was spending on things that like for convenience, fast food and things like that because I felt like I didn't have time. And I felt like I was trying to buy back time. And so I really try to help people identify what they're what they're looking for. Like, what are you looking for with your spending? What are you escaping from? What are you trying to achieve in your life? Because spending really does tell a story, and oftentimes we're buying to compensate. We're buying to feel better about ourselves or to live this fantasy life that we're not actually living. And so it really is like that discovery of taking control of your life and taking control of your money and your spending decisions rather than your spending taking control of you. And that's where I really think that people need to understand that it is a choice and it is doable. It is achievable.
Yeah.
So, Cody, I know you didn't ask me this question,
Yeah.
but it sounds like you're looking for something tangible. And so I'll tell you something that I've tried and that has worked with for clients. And I think it kind of goes along with what Mary Ann's talking about right now. And that's
Mhm.
the idea is as you've uncovered what it is, what they're spending, what story is it they're trying to tell with that story. And then what is it that actually brings them the joy and the fulfillment that they're looking for when they make the decision to not go and buy that bargain, for example, the $10 or the $20 that they didn't spend on that shirt that they really wanted from over here at Target, I actually have them set up an account specifically for the thing that they're actually wanting. So in the
Yes.
example that she just gave, it would be like, okay, so you say that you can't afford an in-home cook or cleaning service. What if you say no to yourself for this one eat out time? We're actually going to take the money you would have spent from that specific meal. In my case, we have a family of 6, so you can't eat even fast food for less than $60 today. So
Yeah.
we would take that $60 and immediately take it out of whatever account I would have spent it on and transfer it to this new place where it's going to be building up for the thing that I actually want or that the client actually wants. Is that something that you're looking for,
Yeah.
like a tangible example of how to help the person change their trajectory? Because that creates that motivator for them, because
Mhm.
motivation, like you and I have talked about this extensively, Cody,
Yeah.
about how motivation is fleeting and it's not something that really drives people. But it is something that helps people get going, and it's something that we can't create for them. But we have to help them create for themselves. And so seeing that number grow up, not only does it create a motivator for them, but it creates like a self-efficacy. It helps them realize like, oh my gosh, I actually can do this. I can afford this when I choose that over this other thing that doesn't do what it's supposed to for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I do think that is a good tangible strategy. But I also really liked what Mary Ann was saying too, because essentially what you're saying, Mary Ann, was like it has a lot to do with a person's relationship with money and what might be triggering them, where things come from, and just getting like a better understanding of that, not just for you as the coach, but most importantly for them as the
Yeah.
client. That's where the real shift happens. And I would agree with you, because the very first session that I have when I work with people, like coaching clients, is talking about their relationship with money. We don't do anything with like diving into the numbers or anything like that. That's later on kind of thing. Because I think that's really, really important is for us to explore those things. Like, hey, like, what do your spending habits look like? Why do you feel like you spend that way? You know, what are you trying to get out of it? Where is that coming from? What's your upbringing look like? Like all these different types of things. Because the moment that they actually sit down and think about that, then they actually have a chance to realize like why they're actually doing it. And we're people, we have lives, you know, like we don't sit down and, you know, sip a cup of coffee and we're like, why do I spend money? Like no one does that.
Yeah.
You know, so if you give them an opportunity to actually do that, then that's it. It all starts with the heart and mind kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then once you have that in place, then you can do something that Maria's talking about, which is more of like a you know, I guess tangible thing. You know, I'm trying to think of a different word, but that's the word. You know.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad you brought that up because that's what I encourage people to do. Otherwise, it just gets lost in checking. And how motivating is that? You just see that money getting spent elsewhere, and it's like, well, I might as well spend it on what I care about, not on boring stuff like groceries. Yeah. And I think it was Dr. Beakey, I believe he said, you know, when you said we don't often say, why do I spend money? We say that after the fact. Why do I spend money?
Right.
But he said instead of asking what was I thinking, we need to ask what was I feeling. And that's what I really want to have people understand, as I've been learning more and more about emotions, is that emotions are the first responders to anything in our lives. They are working in the background, and whenever they see something that they deem a potential red flag, a potential threat to us, they send an emotion, and that's like our first alert that we need to do some investigation. It's like, for metaphors and things, it's like a smoke alarm. You know, the smoke alarm's going off. We need to do our due diligence and figure out where the smoke alarm is going off. If there's a fire, we don't go in hose blazing, ready to put out a fire we don't know is there. And so that's what we need to do. We need to go in and figure out, like, why did it go off in the first place? Why was I feeling that? Why was there smoke alarm? But we don't. We just run out of the house. We don't do any investigation. And so we need to learn to, like, first sit with those emotions and then figure out, what is this emotion telling me? And it's so fascinating to me that the emotion like sadness is actually an emotion that connects us with other people. It should, if we share it. And yet, and it indicates like we need healing. And it's like, okay, well, what do we need healing from? What do we need healing with? Well, we don't ask those questions. We just go to the healing balms of Bath and Body Works. We don't look for healing elsewhere. We don't look for it within ourselves. And I mean, there's examples like that for every single emotion, and we don't do the need indicated. The need indicated is what our body actually needs, but our brain is like, nope, I don't want to do that. That's too hard, too dangerous. I don't want to do that. It's just going to go to the quickest thing, and that's overeating. It's overspending. It's whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. So if there was a new coach out here and they were thinking that what this thing about financial coaching is and means is just helping people with the budget, right? They're brand new into this space. They're an aspiring coach. What's the one thing that you would want them to know as they start helping people with money, spending, you know, money psychology, any of that? I know it's a big question, but like if there's one message that you could give this new coach or maybe this newer coach, what would that be?
That's a great question. So, method or like an understanding?
Either way.
Either.
Whatever your heart's telling you to say.
I would say that there's just that understanding that, you know, we're all spenders and that we all have these needs that need to be met and they aren't being met. And so your job as a financial coach is to figure out what need is not being met for them. And you're kind of doing your detective work to figure out what their spending is saying about that need and how you can help them meet that without without that destructive spending habit coming into the way. That's what I would say.
Love that. Love it. Awesome. Maria, you got anything?
No, I'm just sitting. I'm fascinated. I mean, I do have one question, but I want to be careful where I don't know where it'll go. So I'll ask it and we'll see where.
Okay.
No. I'll ask it and we'll see where it goes. I'm curious to know what percentage of people that you've worked with, Mary Ann, do you find that need, that deeper need that they're feeling, is actually a spiritual one?
That's a good question. Honestly, I think that most, if not all of us, have that. It's like 95% of people, because I actually did. It's interesting you brought that up. I actually did a questionnaire with some of my clients, and I just had them like rate the things that they find the most important for them. And some of the things were like finding peace with the universe, finding peace in a world full of chaos, being loved, and things like that. And they were very spiritual oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting. And all of them were like, wow, yeah, I really identify with this one. I really identify with this one. And I asked them, I said, can you meet those needs that you have, that you really care about, with spending? I was like, no, you can't. We think we can. The brain thinks we can. The brain understands and thinks that it's a lot easier to buy respect and buy peace, to buy things that make things less chaotic. But it doesn't have a price tag, usually, the things of spiritual nature. And I think too, if we are to look at, if someone were to look at our spending and not know anything about us, what would that say about us? What would that say about what they do, what they love, and I know for me, if someone would look at mine and be like, wow, she's really materialistic. She's into clothing and accessories and convenience, and it's like, no, those aren't what I value. I value my family. I value personal development. I value these things. And we can gently approach that, like not in an antagonistic way, but just say like, what do you value? And then it's like, does your spending reflect that? And like, probably not. And so we don't have to be the ones saying that. We can have clients be the ones having those realizations and be kind of gently guiding them through that. So I think that's a fabulous question, because I think all of us, it comes down to those spiritual needs. So I'd say most, if not all.
All right. Yeah, I would agree. And I see that a lot as well. And it just feels like right now, especially, I mean, we've always been very an individualistic society, but we seem to be going even further in that direction. And so people, I think when you pair that with the idea that consumerism is so high and we're constantly advertised to, like even just on the way to school today, one of my daughters was talking about a project they were doing, and she's like, yeah, we had to come up with something like, something that motivates someone. And someone's like, well, you mean like Nike's Just Do It, or Toyota, let's go places. And it's just like all of those messages that we're getting in order to get us to buy something make us believe that if you want to go places, then like getting a new car is the way to do that, that kind of thing. So I think when you compare those two things, we actually take out the spiritual part of it, and we're just left to think that we can do it entirely on our own. And I don't know that we can. So I asked the question because I just wonder if we're really going to help people get out of this, I don't know, spinning wheel that they're on, that is it something that we need to be willing to address with our clients? And it
I
sounds
think
like
so.
it is.
And I actually I started a book called Spent, and it's like, the subtitle is like The Sex and Evolution of Humankind, something like that. And he brought up a really interesting point, and he said, we've gone for, I mean, if you talk to cavemen and say, comparing their lives then to our life now, and he basically said, you know, Rosie spends her days nursing her children, watching kids play, talking with friends, nurturing the community, cooking meals, and then this guy comes in from the modern 21st century, and he has all these things, and there's people that are, working 40 plus hours a week. They're depressed. They're taking medicine because they're depressed. They have all these things and they don't have time to take care of all the things, and they hire people to take care of them. And it was just all of these things. And the response of the lady was like, I don't want that. And I almost was hit with like, my responsibility as a spending coach is almost to help people release the control that money has on them.
Mm-hmm.
That like, they don't have to have money to be happy. It's to secure a financial life, yes, but it is not fundamental for happiness. And so I do think there has to be, whether it's spiritual or like motivation, however you want to phrase it in your practice, I think that's really important to help people have a balanced approach.
Mm. Well, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us, all of you listeners out there. And so I'd just like to say thank you so much, Mary Ann, for coming today and having this conversation with us. As always on this show, like the Cody mentioned ahead of time, we have something that we want to talk about and then we just go. And so we never really know which direction it's going to go. And this one went in a few, and I think they were very interesting directions. So I appreciate your willingness to share in such a open and vulnerable approach. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Our pleasure.
Where can people find you, Mary Ann?
Sure. So my blog is Money Make Under Community, or excuse me, Money Make Under. And then I have a free Facebook community, the Money Make Under community. And my blog, moneymakeunder.com, is also where you'll find the spending type quiz that you can take for free. And yeah, I'm just more than happy to talk, chat, free coaching, whatever, just especially with coaches, because you're in the trenches more so than me, and bouncing ideas off to help me and you. So I would love to talk with any and all coaches, just with your questions about spending, because we can all learn from each other's expertise and insights. So I would love to chat. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was a really important discussion, and one that we talk about from time to time, but never this deep, I don't think. So, yeah, it was very valuable to myself and Maria as well. So thank you for that. And we also want to say thank you to our listeners as well, especially those of you who are every weekers. And if it's your first time listening because you saw that Mary Ann was going to be on the show, so you tuned in, cool. What we call the every weekers are people who listen to our episodes every week. So if you are your first time listening, welcome. If you want to become an every weeker, it's super easy. You just got to listen every week. So, check it out. We do have a few, free resources as well, just like Mary Ann with our Facebook group. So make sure you jump into that. It's the Financial Coaches Community by New Money Habits. And so thanks for checking in this week, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our hosts by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.